I think as we were discussing earlier in the day, just a few minutes back, this is a unique moment in terms of the trajectory of G20, and I have two excellencies here from Brazil and from South Africa, the great troika that is forming, and hopefully perhaps the global governance conversations will look very different once the South African presidency comes to an end in 2 years' time, and then I think we can look back at this journey with the kind of possibilities that have emerged across this. So let me just start with you, Ambassador. We have talked a lot about India's presidency. It is coming to an end, and as the baton goes to you, the world is still as fragmented as it was when the Indian presidency started. The institutional frameworks of the global order are still very weak, unable to respond to the challenges as they are emerging every single day, it seems. So when you look at it, when you look at the presidency that you are about to host, do you look at those challenges as one continuum, and therefore the kind of opportunities and the kind of agenda that India's presidency has set, do you see that as something that can be taken forward by Brazil? What are some of the key aspects that you want to take forward, and what is the innovation that you would like to bring from Brazilian side?
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to this very important debate. Well, I think I should start by saying that India's presidency of the G20 has, of course, had very outstanding achievements. I think some of the key achievements have already been mentioned this morning, but I would just, perhaps one stands out. It's difficult to say what achievement stands out, but certainly this one stands out, is the ability of conducting a presidency with tireless disposition for consensus building, including people in the discussion, and at the summit being able to hammer out this summit declaration against a fairly complex geopolitical background, right? And with this disposition to dialogue, to bring people together, even if you are living in a very complex geopolitical era or times, this is, I think, it's a main takeaway which Brazil, I think, will try to live up to. Because this will define to a large extent our presidency too, the ability to convince the countries sitting around the G20 table that they have to talk to each other. We are seeing that another very serious unfolding crisis as we speak now happening in the Middle East. So we're seeing that the black swans, I think, now are normal in the sense that sometimes this unexpected, very serious crisis, they used to happen not so much on a row as they are happening now. So I think this wisdom, I think, shown by the Indian presidency should be carried out by Brazilian presidency. So this being said, in general terms, I would say that the Brazilian presidency will be one to a fairly amount of continuity in terms of helping consolidate or even embed on the agenda of the G20 the interests, the challenges faced by the global South. And so, as has already been mentioned this morning, we will have when South Africa takes the lead, we will have 4 developing countries on a row presiding over the G20, and this is a very really historical opportunity to embed once and for all these interests, South global interests on the agenda. This being said, how Brazil is going to receive this G20 presidency in terms of against a context of continuity, in a spirit of continuity, what will be our priorities? Our priorities will be, to a great extent, connected with our internal domestic reality, the challenges Brazil face, and how these challenges are also the challenges of the world. As you know, we could say, I think one anthropologist said, Brazilian anthropologist said, that the north-south divide goes through Brazil also, because Brazil remains an unequal society where you have on the one side a cluster of very competitive industries, highly educated people, world-class technology institutions, access to the world, to the globalized world of consumption, of intellectual debate. On the other side, you have a part of the population, sizable part of the population, that still fight against basic needs of life. So the way Brazil has been dealing with its internal divide, which is also an international divide, has contributed to our understanding of how we can contribute to the world based on our domestic experience. So this is and having President Lula, which in his third mandate, having shown that bridging this divide is possible through dialogue, not through radical revolutions or authoritarian solutions, no, through democracy, negotiating every day painstakingly in parliament, in cabinet, discussing with civil society. So he has brought his life achievements and his life experience to the G20. So this is one part of one of our priorities, is the idea of bringing the discussion or living up to your discussion, because you have, of course, emphasized a lot in the Indian presidency the issue of social inclusion. What you are going to bring is within a frame of continuity, our experience, and with the legitimacy of a country who has been dealing with this, with a global leader, as President Lula is, who has dealt with that in his first two mandates and has shown achievements, concrete achievements. So I think this is one of our priorities. The other priority has to do, of course, with environmental sustainability and bringing back to the center stage of climate change discussions the full concept of sustainable development, meaning in all its three components, namely, of course, environmental, social, and economic. And this means through dialogue, but through in a firm way and very clear way, putting forward, I think, to the developed world that it has to live up to its commitments of mobilizing the resources. It has to also not to resort to protectionism in terms in world trade based on environmental reasons or rationales. I'm not saying that environmental rationales should not be part of world trade and should be more and more part of the world trade. But the point is that when you bring to the world of trade policy environmental concerns, you should also bring to the world of trade policy rules climate change rules. Because if you are going to say that, I'm not going to do finger pointing here, but if you want, you are imposing a tariff on the border based on carbon footprint, and you are saying that this is WTO compatible. I'm not even going to question that, because having worked long years in the WTO, I know that details make a lot of difference when it comes to submitting a case to the dispute settlement. So I'm not going to go into these details. But what I missed in this declaration is that it's not only WTO compatible, it's climate change law compatible. I haven't heard that. So this is one thing which worries us, and will be on the table when we discuss sustainable development. Of course, there is also the issue of putting including in the discussion of sustainable development, energy transition. And again, Brazil is going to bring the basic position that energy transition should be technological neutral. One solution that might work to a part of the world might not work to another part of the world, even if some of the solutions are going to be, at the end of the day, transition solutions. But transition, we live through transition. Transition is now. It may last longer than we think, even given the geopolitical developments we are going through. This transition could take longer. And when we live through transitions, we will still accumulate in the atmosphere carbon dioxide. So transition period is important. So we are also focusing on transition, not only what is going to be achieved in 8-year time, 10-year time, then the problems will be solved in 10-year time. But in this 10-year time, the carbon dioxide will be accumulated in the atmosphere. This is a historical accumulation, as we know. So this is another priority for Brazil. And the third priority, it's the reform, of course, of global governance institutions. Here we always say that as much as G20 and other formats, group formats as BRICS, can give us an important contribution to bringing countries together to build consensus block by block, G20, BRICS are no substitutes for the UN. We should aim at reforming and really implementing, or I don't know if we are going to have concrete results at the end of our presidency. This reform of the UN, the multilateral institutions have been going quite long for some years, but the idea is that not forgetting that G7, G20, BRICS discussions do not replace the inclusive discussion of the UN, and you are seeing the paralyzation, how paralyzed are the global governance institutions, which are not allowing for the big challenges of the majority of humanity being dealt with. I'm not again saying that the conflicts we are living these days in Europe, in the Middle East, are not important, but we also have to say that the majority of humanity has to be included in these discussions. Not and its interests and challenges cannot wait until the big geopolitical challenges are solved. So I think I don't want to go on. Of course, this is a very long, could be a very, very long response, but just to, in a nutshell, saying how we see, and we are grateful to the Indian presidency, the idea of continuity, and within this frame of continuity, attaching priority to the issues I have just mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for articulating, I think, your key priorities, and also situating it within the kinds of conversations we are beginning to have about global governance and the changing priorities. And I think once we go to, bring in South Africa into this conversation, it also, elongates the time horizon a bit. I mean, it might be a tad early for South Africa to think about its priorities, but I think as a country that is embedded in these larger conversations about the changing nature of global governance, when you look at Indian presidency and then the Brazilians as they are expressing their priorities, What are the issues that particularly influence you, someone who will have to take on this responsibility a year from now? And also in the context of, I think, a lot of the issues that the ambassador also pointed out, that global governance is fragmented, it's fractured, paralyzed, and we do not see a momentum towards certain kinds of reforms that at one point looked perhaps more likely than today. So when you're looking at it from South Africa's perspective, do you see this continuity as an opportunity for the emerging economies, for global South or developing world, to come together and forge its own global governance agenda, of which it had been kept out for a long time?
Thank you for the question. Also, thank you for having us here. It's an honor to be here and to participate with you in this important debate. Let me also from the onset congratulate you for a fantastic G20 presidency. You know, we've been talking about continuity, but I think in terms of scale, in terms of grandeur, in terms of substantive outcomes, we may be lacking. So we apologize in advance because you have set the bar extremely high. And so, the issue of continuity, I think we do not operate in a vacuum. The global agenda was set. We have Agenda 2030. We are midpoint there, and it's important that developing countries are at the helm of this important organization, the G20, at a time when there's 7 years left until we reach that, of course, starting with Indonesia. As my colleague indicated, that South Africa has got significant challenges like Brazil of inequality, poverty, and unemployment. Equally, we have committed as the world. And perhaps this is where I see the role of the G20. The G20 is not there to replace the UN. The UN is our family. But what the G20 can do is to accelerate, to enrich, to deliver on the promises that were made in the UN. We are not there to replace it. It's a very effective body because we are less members, and even with that, fewer members, Excellency, I remember the many hours you had to negotiate out a document. So negotiations in the UN, of course, is very difficult. So the smaller group, and this group of countries that have leading positions in key decision-making bodies, like the IMF, like the World Bank, those that have the responsibility to deliver on the commitments that were made when the means of implementation were set out in the SDGs, they are around that table. Unlike the G7 that operates on itself, or BRICS, a grouping of developing countries, here we combine both. So it's a unique organization. And it places special emphasis on that organization to deliver, and to deliver for the people. We are also integrated. The challenges of the South, you cannot escape if you're in the North. This issue of migration, where we want to plaster issues, is the result by and large of inequality, is the result of poverty, is the result of insecurity. And so it must be in our collective interest to address this inequality. Globalization that has delivered significant growth in the last few decades also had its drawbacks. Inequality persists and has increased, exacerbated by the pandemic of COVID. And so Africa is interested in development, and we are happy that Africa is around the table now so that it can articulate its needs, can influence policy decisions, can influence priority set. We also, the world must be on, if I look at the outcome of G20, and yesterday it was made by our the BRICS Sherpa the point that perhaps what happened in August in South Africa may have scared those in the North. Because globally there was a discussion around BRICS and what for the globe. 60-odd countries participating, BRICS enlarging. That is a massive threat. If I'm in the North and I have the levers of power for all these decades, because here the South is coming together, presenting an alternative.
And I think if this, I mean, even in Africa, we are creating institutions. On peace and security, we can make definitive decisions around peace and security issues, on development. So, in the absence of these reforms, which are so critical for us, be it in the IMF or the World Bank, in Security Council, elsewhere, I mean, they've become very, very ineffective, may even become irrelevant. And I don't want to say we are counterbalancing it, but we will be creating institutions that work in our interest. The Development Bank created by BRICS is such an example. So we are creating institutions that address the needs of the South, outside of the global institutions. And so I think there's almost like a paradox. Our collective security, our collective prosperity is and lies within the UN and those important organizations. But they must be reviewed, they must reflect the realities of this world. And they must address the challenges that are germane to us. And so, the priorities that you set out, the issues of digitizations, I think those can, data for development, for example, the issues of food security, acceleration of SDGs, that resonates with us. Because what you, in essence, what you are doing is to increase the lever, the gear. We are now in 6th gear. I think cars have got 6 gears these days. So we are now in top speed after the Delhi summit. We can reach the SDGs, which we are struggling to reach as a result of the impact of COVID, if we start implementing these issues, if we ensure that we as developing countries are not only consumers of data, we also control it and we monetize it. Why is it that 5 countries should have control over all of that and benefit from it? So India putting data for development on the table is an important accelerator of the SDGs, food security, health, education, climate change. Because, you know, for us, this debate about climate change, and perhaps in Africa, but for small island developing states, it has become existential. We faced in Cape Town almost a day zero where there were no water. As I made the example last week, Mozambique, our neighboring state, lost its 2nd biggest city due to climate events that occurred. So this for us is not an esoteric debate, it's about existential threat that we are facing. And so we hope that with the continuity, it's what they refer to as the IPSA presidency, India, Brazil, South Africa. We look forward. I mean, we've already done through the IPSA Trust and others some development work. We hope that being at the helm of this organization, our societies, diverse as India is, unequal as Brazil and South Africa is, that we capture in some way the reality of the global South, so that when we agitate, it's not only for our national interest, regional interests, but for the interests of the global South primarily, but also indirectly to the interests of the North. If we don't prosper together, we will fail.
Ambassador, the point I think that was perhaps he picked up from what was earlier said about the rationale for G20 at a time when international institutions, multilateral frameworks are not working. What kind of a role you see for G20? Because here it was suggested that, well, it can't replace the UN, but it has certain, it adds value in strengthening, in accelerating certain kinds of processes of negotiations, certain issues, certain themes that perhaps can be amplified through the G20 process. So, as you take on the G20 presidency, where do you position G20 in the larger matrix of multilateral institutions, and how do you look at the greater, the role for this at a time of withering away of multilateral institutions?
Well, if I Trying to respond to you based on my experience, I think that these groups like G20 or G7 or BRICS, they are very useful to build blocks of consensus, but they will be more useful if they are disposed to bring into their discussion contributions from a larger number of countries. Meaning, for example, in the G20, India has done that, of course, and I think Brazil will do that. Brazil will try to channel channel into the G20 discussions, not only I think a different thinking, because we are living in different realities. We have also developed our own internal reflection, as you have done in your institutions, in your think tanks, in your universities, in your civil society organizations. We have done the same. So we bring innovative, different solutions to the mainstream discussions, which are to a considerable extent, I wouldn't say dominated, but where much of the thinking of the big institutions, universities, and think tanks of the West prevail. So I think that if the G20 can be a place where which will receive contributions from a larger membership, even a membership which is larger than the G20 members, if we allow this, we receive this intellectual contribution with an open mind and willing to look into it and to see the merits and the realities that they bring forward when they are formulated, I think the G20 can be more useful as a contributor to a larger consensus, which has to take place at the end of the day in the United Nations. I recall, just in a show, I recall that in the early 2000s we had another G20 in the WTO, the so-called agricultural G20, and of course it was a restricted group, G20, 20 members, but the fact that at that time India, Brazil, South Africa, we were always making a point of bringing into the discussions not only our trade policy interests, but the trade policy interests, namely of agriculture, of the larger membership. And we know has to be feared that Brazilian agribusiness has different interests when compared to the interest of some least developed countries. But that notwithstanding, we are prepared to bring to the discussions their concerns. So this was an example where we could, with a restricted group, bring the contribution of a larger membership in practice.
Excellency, you raised this point earlier, and I think G20 is now G21 with the inclusion of African Union, and I would be interested to have your views on what does that do what will that do to your presidency, because of course now there is African Union present there and a greater African voice within the G20 process, and does that change the texture of the conversations that perhaps you would be bringing to the table, or perhaps that is already happening as G20 progresses with a greater representation from Africa?
No, thank you for that. I'm not sure about G21. I think the G77 started out with 77 members. They're now 134 and they are still the G77. So perhaps it will still be the G20. But the important point, no, I think what is, your theme was about the world as a family. And my sense is that this family would have been incomplete if you excluded the 1.3 billion people. They bring to the G20 3 trillion in collective GDP. So Africa is not a basket case only. Africa has a contribution to make. The issues of debt sustainability, for example, those developmental issues, I think, is what Africa will articulate. Africa has got no geopolitical aspirations. And so therefore the focus will be on these development issues that can advance the well-being of citizens, can create prosperity for citizens, and can address the issues of climate change, because we are at a cold phase. You saw what happened during COVID, when everyone said that no one is safe until everyone is safe, and then ordered all the medication in their own countries. And the example that India said that despite their own health challenges and fight against COVID, they were able to share. And so you see the humanity that Africa brings, that human spirit that they bring, I think will make a substantive difference in the outcomes. Because it's a human-centric society, like India and like your G20 sought to achieve. It's a human-centered debate around development. We have no interest other than making this world a better place for all, and making sure that in reality the commitment to leave no one behind is given effect, is given a tangible outcome. So that, I think, is the quantitative and qualitative inputs that Africa will bring. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this is a conversation that has just begun in terms of what Brazil's presidency would look like, and so we'll hear about it over the course of the next year almost, and of course South Africa is after that. So, but I think the broader point about this being a unique moment in G20's journey is very well made with what I think both the excellencies here have stated and how they've articulated their aspirations as far as G20 is concerned. So, Excellencies, thank you so much for being with us today here and giving us a sense of what G20 and this journey looks like from your vantage point. Thank you, and I hand it over back to the program. MC.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Your Excellency.